It's Monday, June 9th, 2008. The first episode ever of Deep Focus. And man, we came out of the box smoking. A fantastic guest, Graham Haynes, is with us. And the topic is the wonderful Ed Blackwell. And I don't think anybody's chosen Ed Blackwell since. He wasn't really known so much as a band leader, but great drummer. But here he is leading a band, and Graham's got some great stories. We're going to hear about Ed Blackwell. We're going to hear about Don Cherry. We're going to hear about Roy Haynes. We're going to hear about all kinds of great stuff. Carlos Ward, and really fantastic first person, as only Graham Haynes can do. And I won't go on to a whole divergence about the origin of Deep Focus. I know there are those among you. You have identified yourselves to me as quote-unquote Deep Focus completists. And I respect is profound. You guys all of you are great listeners. Tell you what, at the end, I will tell you a little tale of how Deep Focus came to be. And this was the first manifestation of it. And I think it's a pretty great one. The only reason that I've never posted it before is it's another one of these kind of orphan shows where I don't have the complete recording. I have most of it, but we're missing chunks, and I put a big emphasis on the complete shows in the beginning, but this is too good to sit on. If that's going to bug you, well, move on to another one. We're closing in on 400 episodes posted altogether. So we joined Graham in the middle of a thought, but don't worry, you'll catch the stream of it very quickly. And here we go. It's Deep Focus. All right. There's two parts to this one. This is the first part. There's going to be another one next week. Okay. Deep Focus. Should I say? Sure. Okay. June 9th, 2008. Graham Haynes on the topic of Ed Blackwell. Go.
Before a gig, I'd come back here. So I got this call to do this gig with Blackwell. And I was totally floored by the opportunity. So, I came back to New York. We did some rehearsals. We did one quick rehearsal. And we played a gig at Wesleyan. That was the first gig. We did rehearsal and played the gig. And it was great playing with Ed. I mean, I'd listened to him for years. Ed was one of my favorite drummers. I mean, to me, he was one of the most interesting guys playing the trap set, and I listened to drummers, and I used to listening to drummers, but it was a real pleasure playing with Ed, and especially I have to go back myself up a little bit. I probably had played with him before then, because Don used to have a running gig at a place called the Continental.
Right,
and
right.
He had every Monday night there.
Yeah.
And I sat in with him once there, and that Blackwell was on that gig.
Continental. Now, those of you relatively new to New York might know it. And if you come out of the rock and roll world, became Continental Divide, became a big rock spot. But it had been it wasn't really a conventional jazz club, but Don really made himself at home there, or they made Don at home there.
Yeah, they made him at home, and it was the Continental Divide then.
Yeah.
It was right across the street from where the Five Spot
Right,
used
it
to
became
be.
the Continental.
Yeah, it became the Continental.
Right,
yeah.
It was Continental Divide,
yeah.
right.
8th Street and
St. Mark's and Bowery, I guess. Right?
Yeah. So, he had a running gig there every Monday for I don't know how long. And sometimes I'd go by there, and I think Don had invited me. He said, "Yeah, man, we're playing here every Monday night." So once I went by there and I played with him, we played all night. And like I was saying before, when we were off the mic, Don would start playing a tune, and by the time I'd figure out what it was, he'd go somewhere else.
Right.
And that was his thing. He's,
you know what? I'll tell you something funny. He was a guest on this show many, many, many times. And he would do the radio show that same way. I mean, he'd show up with a bunch of records, and he would all but throw them at me. Play this. Wait, no, throw that. No, not that one. This one, play this. Wait, no, can you put them both on at the same time? Yeah, but you really want to? Yeah. No, wait, here, play this. Play that again.
Wow.
Open the mic. Honestly, I'll tell you the truth. Don Cherry, before you could, I mean, if anybody ever wanted to look at Mitch Goldman on the radio, you could divide clearly into two sections. Before Don Cherry, after Don Cherry, permanently reprogrammed my approach to this medium, and with exactly that, just conceptually, it was a high wire act. Anyway, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to take you out of your game. But.
Yeah, no, but it was a similar experience for me playing with him.
Yeah,
and completely changed my whole idea. And I'd always been into, there was a part of that. There's a little part of that Miles had too. When you listen to a lot of those records from the '60s, the way Miles would move in and out of tunes. It's just like, okay, I want to go here now, so we're going here now. So as in the band with Tony and Ron and Wayne, it's like, okay, we want to go here. It would be one tune, but the information that was happening would be kind of, when each player played and entered and played their solo, would be another section, another tune inside of the tune. So I was kind of used, from listening to those records, listening to those Miles records from the 60s, late 50s, 60s, I was kind of used to that constant moving inside of the material from one energy to another energy. But with Don, it would be moving between different tunes. He would, in the course of a half hour, he'd play 12 tunes, and that's just, we talked about the whole thing with the shortwave radio.
We talked about that off mic.
Yeah, okay.
What was that?
Well, so, yeah, I have these recordings here that we talked about, the stuff from Montmartre and everything, and I spoke to Carl Berger, who I've been playing with a lot recently in the last 3 years. And I had a gig in Europe with Carl, and I brought these CDs with me. I had like a stack of them. And we were on a bus coming from the airport, and I played some of this stuff for Carl. And, Carl clearly remembered this stuff, and he said, well, a lot of these things, he was moving from one piece to another piece to another piece.
Sorry about that.
Okay, yeah, it's fine.
Yeah.
And Carl said, yeah, Don was listening to John had this shortwave radio he'd be listening to all night, and then he'd be writing this music. He'd come to the gig the next day, and then he'd be moving through all these pieces like at this pace, at this crazy pace, and that's from listening to the shortwave radio. He'd be listening to this radio and flipping channels, and I guess when you got one channel, it's like you're hearing a bunch of channels, or you're hearing two pieces of music at one time and all this stuff, and that's where it came from. He was hearing all this music coming from left and right and here and there and coming in and out and stuff, and that's how he played. He played like that all the time. He didn't stay in one piece too long.
And what now? You say he might flash through 12 tunes. What were typically might make up a set? Would it be all his compositions or?
Well, no, there wouldn't be all his compositions. He'd do some of Ornette's stuff. He'd do some of his stuff. When he was playing the kind of Divide, he was playing a lot of piano. He was get at the piano and play monk tunes, So he started playing some monk tunes, and then by the time I'd figure out the head, then he'd be somewhere else. He'd be out at cornet, or he'd be playing the Dusenguni and going somewhere else. It was just, that's the way he heard, the shortwave radio.
Yeah.
Shortwave radio concept.
So you had this conversation with Kunle Mwanga.
Yeah, oh yeah, back to that. Yeah, so I had Kunle said, okay, we want you in the band, I guess to some extent the Wesleyan gig was kind of an audition to see if I would work. And after I did the gig, and Blackwell and Kunle said, well, you want to play in the band? I said, you kidding? And they thought I meant no when I said, are you kidding? and I had the gig. So that was the first gig at Wesley. I remember it was the first time I met Anthony Braxton, because he was at that gig. And this would have been 91, I think. And then shortly after that, we had a week at the Vanguard, which was really nice. That was really nice. We got to play for a whole week at the Vanguard and go through all this material. Carlos Ward was in the band. He was writing a lot of stuff, and he's one of my favorite composers. And then, Mark Elias was writing stuff. I wasn't writing anything, but we do their tunes, and, just learning their music was an honor for me, and playing with them. And then I remember one night my dad came. So my dad came. He's sitting in the front row, and Blackwell was killing. And my father was totally floored, man. He was screaming and hollering all night at the gig.
For those who don't
Cheering.
know, should know who your father is.
My father's Roy Haynes, the drummer. Yeah. So he was completely knocked out by that gig, man. And they talked after the gig, and they must go back. They must have gone back to probably late 50s or something.
I'm sure.
Yeah, and maybe even before, because I think my dad told me that he'd come through New Orleans when Blackwell was still there.
Wow.
So before he'd left New Orleans. So,
and I'm sure having your dad there and having him throwing some coal on the fire,
it was
pumped it up.
I wish we had recorded that. There may be a recording of that somewhere, but I have to check that out. But it was great, man. That week at the Vanguard was great. I was totally loving it, and so we did the Vanguard gig. I stuck around New York a little while, and then went back to Paris, and then Kunle called me about this gig. This was the Eddie Moore Festival. What is it? Does it say which festival it is? There's a whole bunch of notes and stuff in here which I haven't read. I haven't even looked at this CD for a little while.
This is I think I have it here, right? Third annual Eddie Moore Festival.
The third annual Eddie Moore Festival. I didn't know Eddie Moore until I played who Eddie Moore was, until I played this festival.
He was a Bay Area drummer, and he recorded with he'd done a lot of stuff, but the Bay Area was always his home, as I understood it. And I guess he, I'm remembering actually when he passed, I want to say was spring of 1990. I happen to remember because I was in California when I heard about that. I remember when that was, and so that would make sense. That would fit with this. This was the third year, so this was I'm looking 92, August of 92 was the date of this. We're referring to this.
Yeah, August 92.
Recording.
That's the third one.
Yeah.
So if he died in 90, okay.
Yeah.
So we did, let me see, we didn't rehearse in New York, I think we rehearsed in Berkeley. We did 1 or 2 rehearsals, I think. And it probably was 1. It might have been 2. In Berkeley. And it's great. I love Berkeley. Yeah, I love being out there. I love California. Just it's just a great hang. It's just great leaving New York and going to California. And we did the rehearsals, and Ed was sick. That's the other thing. Ed was ill. I don't know if most people know that he was on dialysis at that time, and he had taken a turn for the worst. In fact, I'll go back a little bit. I'll back up a little bit. I remember you probably remember, you were probably around, in 1987 or 88, they had an Ed Blackwell festival. They had not a tribute, but they had were trying to raise money.
I want to say, did Judy Sneed have something to do with putting that together, as I recall?
Probably, yeah. And I remember playing at the Knitting Factory. Part of it was at the Knitting Factory, and part of it was at Riverside Church.
Yes.
And it was a benefit to raise money for his medical stuff. And so I remember playing that gig. So Ed had been on dialysis for some time.
I think he'd been on dialysis for a long, long time, much longer than any of us were aware of it at the time. I want to say, from my memory of that time, like years and years.
So when we did the Vanguard gig, he was well, but when we did this festival, the Eddie Moore Festival, he was in a wheelchair. He wasn't well. But let me tell you, when he got behind those drums, man, they had to carry him from the wheelchair to the drum set. But when he got behind those drums, well, you'll hear it. You wouldn't know. He was nailing it like it was nobody's business, man. It was kind of like when he came in and they announced his name. The guy came and announced the band and announced Ed Blackwell, and then when they carried him from the wheelchair to the stand, there was this hush.
Wow.
It was this big, huge hush, and they brought him behind the drums, just that behind the drums. And they called off the tune. We started to play, and it was like off to the races.
Really? Yeah. Wow.
And the whole, this is a 2 CD set, 2 volumes. It was 2 sets.
Yeah.
And the whole gig was like that. He was killing, man. And I was playing actually rather long solos. Now that I think about it, I played too long. We were all playing pretty long, and Ed was right in there for all these solos, and then played. So I'll go back to Don. I think I saw Don when I came into the club. I remember I saw Pharoah in the parking lot. When we got to the gig, Pharoah Sanders was in the parking lot. Uh-huh. And when I got inside, Don Cherry was at the gig, also with a lot of other people. Lester Bowie was there. I think Cedar Walton was there, and I think Bobby Hutcherson was there. They were also playing, I believe. It was a while ago, and my memory's not the best. But there were a bunch of people there hanging out. Don Moyer was there, and all these cats were playing. It was a festival, so cats were hanging out,
And was there a sense, was it in so many words that you were kind of filling Don's shoes doing this gig, or was that?
Well, I guess in a way, yeah. I guess it was kind of like that, because it was almost like Don's band, but it was Blackwell's band. It was there were people that in the band that had worked with Don, but it was Blackwell's approach and Blackwell's concept, which was all coming out of Ornette and Don anyway, and Blackwell, because he had strong ideas about what he wanted to do, particularly behind the drum set. But Carlos and Carlos Ward and Mark Elias were writing material, and it was almost like a Don Cherry band, but not Don's band. So this piece, Lito, I guess it was recorded by Don. They did that piece with Don's band, with Carlos in the band, and this is Carlos's piece. And there are 3 sections to the piece. There's an opening section that's kind of like there's a term for it in Indian music. They call it alap. In the Arabic music, they call it something else. I can't remember the term. But it's an open section, no rhythm. There's an open flowing section. Then the rhythm comes in the second. No, then there's a second section, and that's where Don comes in. So we play this piece. I'd been used to playing it with the band, and there's an open section, we play it, and then there's a second section we play it, and then Don started playing from the audience.
Ha!
And at that moment, I was the happiest guy on the planet. Here, playing with Blackwell, Don is there. He comes and plays in the break, and it's like I was smiling ear to ear. I remember when it happened.
Can you play trumpet when you're smiling like that?
Yeah, that's the thing. I was grinning so much that I almost screwed up when I was playing in the melody. But I was really, really happy, to have Don there and have him play, and he had his horn with him, and he just came up and played, and it was great. It was great.
You're listening to WKCR. My name is Mitch Goldman, and this program we call Deep Focus, putting a deep focus on this moment in this band. Very, very fortunate to have Graham Haynes with us tonight, who is part of this live recording that we're about to hear. And I hope you don't mind if I just let the people know about an opportunity to hear you. Speaking of live performances, we're listening to a live recording, but here's your chance to see a live performance in person, to be there, breathing with the musicians. There's nothing like that experience. We are trying our best to recreate this, but to feel the real thing, you're going to want to be at Drome Friday night at 10 o'clock. Drome is in the East Village, 85 Avenue A. It's between 5th and 6th Street. And the band Adam Rudolph's Moving Pictures is playing. And it's a banging bunch of all-stars in this band. Hamid Drake, Ned Rothenberg, Kenny Wessel, Adam Rudolph, Graham Haynes, all together making music. And if you would like to be down there, I'm going to give you the phone number to make a reservation for Drome for Adam Rudolph's Moving Pictures Friday night, 10 o'clock set. 212-777-1157 is the phone number at Drome. 212-777-1157. That's Friday night at 10 o'clock. And so we're gonna take everybody back to Oakland, huh?
Yeah.
And now
back to Yoshi's.
Yoshi's
in Oakland, when it was in Oakland, because I think it's somewhere else now.
They have two now.
Oh,
I think
okay.
they still have the one in Yoshi in Oakland, and I think they have a larger one in San Francisco that opened, I want to say, within the last year. Something like that. So,
cool.
All right, we're going to come with us. Come on. We're getting in the Wayback Machine. Going to August 1992 at Yoshi's. This is the band called Ed Blackwell Project, and it's Carlos Ward on alto saxophone and flute, Mark Elias on the bass, Ed Blackwell, of course, the leader on drums, our guest, Graham Haynes, playing cornet. And you're going to hear on this piece that we're going to play, we're going to start with Don Cherry's entrance on, was it trumpet, pocket trumpet?
Yeah,
pocket trumpet.
Yeah.
On
the second section of Leto. I think it should say on there.
it says Leto Part 2.
Part 2.
Yeah, so
Part 2
you'll hear Don come in, but it's a whole set of great music on WKCR. Music from Ed Blackwell Project on WKCR FM New York. And very excited audience at Yoshi's, August 1992. Programs Jazz Alternatives heard each weeknight from 6 to 9 p.m. I make out like they're applauding for me. My name is Mitch Goldman, and we're doing a special program. This is, we're calling Deep Focus, taking a deep look at one particular moment in time, one band. And our guest in the studio tonight is Graham Haynes, who was the cornet player on that piece.
Let's hear it for the Ed Blackwell Project.
Let's.
Carlos Ward, Mark Elias, Graham Haynes, Ed Blackwell Project. Let's hear it.
And there was a special guest there. You heard Don Cherry come in on pocket trumpet on that piece, Leto, written by alto saxophonist and flutist Carlos Ward. And Graham, thanks for being with us tonight. We've been, hope you're not just joining us because we've really been digging into this and getting some great insights from you. You touched on Blackwell's concept as a leader, and maybe you could talk about that a little bit more.
Blackwell's concept as a leader, I mean, he wasn't the type of leader that had a lot of opinions and a lot of ideas about, okay, I want this way and I want that way. And he wasn't saying a whole lot of stuff. He would just the cats brought the tunes in, we'd run through the tunes, and then, when it came time to do the gig, we'd just play. So he wasn't that type of a leader, but, he led from playing. The leader, and a lot of drummers, some drummers are like that. They lead from playing. They're not the type of leader that's going to tell you a lot of stuff. It all comes from the instrument, and how they set everything up, how they make the breaks, and how they set up the melodies, and how they try to create contrast and dynamics and things. He was that type of a leader. He didn't talk about how he wanted. He might, if he said, there'd be a discussion about, okay, we're going to play the A twice and then play the B, and okay, we'll play it twice and then play the B, but going out, we'll play the A once and then play the B, stuff like that. We'd all kind of agree. We'd all talk about that, Carlos and Mark and myself and Ed. Yeah.
It's funny. I remember being a big fan of Blackwell's before I ever saw him play. And I remember thinking that, he radiates all this energy in his playing. And I remember expecting him to be, maybe in the style of like Elvin Jones, who was doing this like high wire act while he's playing the drums. And then seeing Blackwell and he was so spare. There's such an economy of movement.
Yeah. That, I think, if I'm not mistaken, he probably got from Max Roach. I believe, and I could be wrong, I believe that he really watched Max a lot and he learned a lot from him. The way he sat behind the kit was really kind of the Max Roach approach, which probably comes from Joe Jones.
Right.
Yeah, I remember playing with him and thinking about that as well. He didn't have that hunched over. He was very erect, very relaxed, and everything was right at a hand's distance. It's like he knew where everything was, and he had all these polyrhythms and all these things going. All these things were happening, but he was very relaxed and very erect and very controlled.
And smiling.
And smiling. He was a great big guy. He was a tall guy, Both of those guys, Cherry and Ed, were really tall guys. You don't see a lot of musicians, great big, tall guys,
Yeah.
Sitting behind a drum set,
That's true. That's true. He had a real infectious joyousness. I mean, it seemed like just a delight for him to be living in his skin.
Yeah, I think he loved to play. He loved the drums. He loved rhythm, and I loved playing with him. I loved playing with Ed so much. I remember when I got called to play the band, as I said, I was living in Paris, And I'd gone to Paris because I was interested in African music, and I know that Ed, knew all this stuff, all these rhythms and cross rhythms and all these things, and I had gone to work with a lot of African cats and understand polyrhythms and rhythmic layering and all this stuff, and so I had dug my teeth into all this polyrhythms and things and 6/8 and different ways to use the 6 against the 4 and all these things. And so when I played with Ed, I got a chance to use, not only to hear him do it and hear his approach to it, but I got to play all these ideas that I had against what he was doing, which was coming from the same thing. And it was a real treat. I'll tell you something. I'll just go off track a little bit. When I decided to move to Paris, I ran into Cherry, and Cherry told me, "Hey man, if you're gonna move to Paris, there's this guy. He's on the Seine, and I'll give you his name. And if you find him, he's got like a motorcycle. He's got like a moped of mine. And if you tell him, he'll give it to you, and you can have it. So like Cherry knew all these people everywhere, all over the world. That call this guy, and you can tell him, and that's He was great for that, man. He was great, and I'd see him. He'd say, "Yeah, man, there's this cat down in Cologne, man. He's doing some really interesting stuff, and I've been working with him. Give him a call, and you guys should hook up." And Cherry was always trying to connect people.
Yes.
Yeah, he was always trying to connect people. I mean, one thing he told me was he wanted to do a recording, or he wanted to put a band together with all the kids of sons of the musicians, the daughters and sons, the offspring of the artists. So like he wanted to have something with his kids. In fact, first time I saw him play, I think he had his son David playing with him, and he and Eagle Eye, and then he wanted to do a thing with Ravi and with Charlie Hayden's kids and me and Matt Garrison. He wanted to put this thing together. He was always trying to connect people.
Yes,
it never happened. But I mean, I wound up playing with a lot of those guys, but I think Jerry kind of envisioned it a different way, but
it's funny. He people like to say that. Well, he was kind of came up with this world music concept before anybody else was doing it, which is true. But what that really meant in his experience, the world was a very small place for him. It was so. He didn't just talk the talk. He would get up and go and show up in a place with his horn, with his pocket trumpet, and play and meet people and discover what there was to find there, and that it was a very literal thing for him, I think.
Yeah, it was, and the whole thing for him, I think, was all about he was very much into the community and the family and the organic, like learning.
Yes.
Which I talked to Carl Berger a lot about, because he had the Creative Music Studio, and that was the whole approach to the Creative Music Studio, is like having a family and an extended family in one place. Then you can come and go and do your gigs and go overseas and do your things, but come back and share what you learned. And Jerry was totally into that. It was just a little bit more organic the way he was like on the road. I mean, this guy was living out of a bus with his family, going around Europe and going from like Paris to Istanbul in a bus with his family. It's like,
oh yeah. So, and he had a whole program, an audio program. I don't know if it was specifically a radio program, but we would play segments from it on this show. It was teaching music, and it was great. It was great. It was a thing that he had done sometime. Who knows how long before, we were doing this together in mid-'80s. And I wonder where that is. And if that...
Well, I remember clearly when he did the Don Cherry Festival.
Yes.
And you guys played so much stuff, man. I couldn't believe that one guy made all this music. I mean, the amount of diversity of music that this guy made is completely floored me, man. And it floored me to the point where I called Don up. He was in San Francisco. I called him up and I said, Don, and he knew the festival was going on because I think he had called the station. There were some interviews that happened. And I called him up. I said, "Man, did you realize you actually played all that stuff?" And he said, "Yeah, man. In fact, I didn't even know that half of that stuff got recorded." But I got into that. Like it's recordings that he didn't know existed that he wanted to get copies of and stuff. But man, this guy played such a diverse amount of music in his life, man. It's like unbelievable, man. I was listening to this festival and he was just doing this stuff with Terry Riley and then with Ornette and then with the Indians and with the
Ian Dury
and with the East Indians and with the Indians in America and with Jim Pepper and then doing something over here that playing with South Africa, playing with the South African musicians and playing with West African musicians, Johnny Diani, and playing, and making solo records on the flute, and then the guy was just like everywhere, man.
Yeah, he had a very large volume of tapes too, and also which I hope is archived somewhere and getting the love and attention it deserves. It should be that it's the foundation of a library, in my mind. Anybody that loves his music, we're talking about Don Cherry and Graham Haynes had great, rare pleasure to know and make music with. I always have the sense, and this applies, it seems to me, equally well to Don and to Blackwell, that, you talk about Blackwell having this great foundation of knowing all this, these various music traditions and this foundation, polyrhythms, all these things. But on the bandstand, making music for both these guys, it seemed as natural and effortless as breathing. Yeah.
Well, when you do it for as long and with as much intent as those guys did it is kind of like that. It's like, it's kinetic. Because, when we were just talking about the rehearsals, how cats would rehearse all day, man, for days and not have a gig. Then you'd have a gig and you'd be playing the whole summer in one joint. And if you've been doing that from like 20 or something, and then you're 45 or 50 or something, then you build up a whole, your DNA is full of all kinds of energy and ideas and stamina from playing music. It's just like, you can just pull stuff out that you don't have to think about. It's spontaneous.
Do you see musicians now having that experience? Maybe coming out of school maybe gives people an opportunity to do that?
No, I don't think so. I'm sure there are some schools, that allow people to approach music in that way, but you got to play. You have to play. School is great, and every school is different. And some are better than others, and some teachers are better than others. I had a long discussion with someone about that not too long ago. But you have to play. You have to play, and you have to play in front of people. There's no substitute for that. Because that kind of, it weeds out a lot of things when you're performing in front of people. It weeds out a lot of things that are not weeds that shouldn't be there.
That's why they call them weeds. But do you see anybody of younger generation having that experience of giving themselves over to the music? I don't know. Maybe it's harder to do now.
Yeah, it's harder to do, but there are young musicians. There are young musicians who are doing that, and we're at a different age now. It's a different age right now. We're in the cyberspace age, and people are making music in a different way and with different means. And they're young people. There are people now who are probably closer, young musicians who are closer towards making music in the way those guys made music than musicians of my generation, because there are things that each generation has their own challenges they have to deal with, and like my generation had to deal with a lot of stuff with the clubs, the closing down of clubs and the changing over of New York or the changing over of the country and the blah 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 and all that. We were victims of that. Young musicians now, I say, well, screw the clubs, screw the labels. We'll just do our thing this way, So, and they're doing it. you got like bands. Like now I'm starting to see all these bands coming from like colleges and stuff, like college bands and like bands from towns and stuff. And these cats, they get together and they do their stuff and they play. I'm not talking so much about the type of music that I do, but it's music. So if you're playing, if you're working at music, it's good. Doesn't matter. If you're working with other people, working by yourself at music is great, but it will never be this. It'll take the place of working with other musicians at music. And when you get to play in front of people, as I said, that's even better.
You're listening to WKCR. My name is Mitch Goldman, and this program, 6 to 9 p.m., is Jazz Alternatives. We are taking a deep focus on this moment in the Ed Blackwell Project, 1992 recording we're going to get back to in a bit. And our guest, whose words and thoughts you're hearing, Graham Haynes, is performing this Friday night. And you can hear him live this Friday at Drome here in New York City at 85 Avenue A, down Avenue A in the East Village, between 5th and 6th Street. He's playing with Adam Rudolph's Moving Pictures. And, you could just about...
let me just quickly
talk you want to talk about
Adam.
that a little bit?
Yeah, talk about Adam a little bit. I first met Adam Rudolph when Adam was working with Yusef Lateef, and they had a group. There was a group called Eternal Wind. Now, Adam's going to have to correct me on this. I don't know if Eternal Wind was Yusef's group or if it was a collective. Maybe it was a collective. But I used to see those guys. I used to be an usher at Symphony Space many years ago. And that's how I met a lot of these cats. That's how I knew Don. And Don used to play at the World Music Institute, and Hassan Hakmoun and Adam and all these cats were playing together, and Yusef. And there was a lot of stuff coming out, a lot of great music coming from the Symphony Space, and I was an usher there, when I was 20-something.
Wow.
So that's how I met Adam originally, but that's how I saw him the first time. I met him sometime later in Germany, but Adam is someone who's also very much connected to Cherry and Blackwell, and he worked with Don for a number of years. I know they played together, and Adam lived with Don in Sweden for some years. So we have that connection. So I've been playing with Adam for a little over 3 years now. I mean, we've kind of connected at through the Gnawa music, and there's a Gnawa music festival. If anyone doesn't know anything about Gnawa, it's music from Morocco, and that's how we first started playing together at the World Music Festival in Essaouira in Morocco. So we've been talking about music, and he's put this band together, Moving Pictures. So we're going to be at Drome on Friday.
This is not to be missed. There's a great, great opportunity to hear this music live, and fantastic band, Hamid Drake, Ned Rothenberg, Kenny Wessel. The phone number at Drome, 212-777-1157, 212-777-1157 is the number to make a reservation at Drome for Adam Rudolph's Moving Pictures, and with our guest, Graham Haynes. And, something I'm curious about is I want to turn our attention back to August 92 and you with the Ed Blackwell Project. So we just heard in that piece where Don Cherry got up in the audience.
Yeah.
And started throwing a little something on the fire there.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering if he, what you got. Had you met Don at that point? You
yeah. By that time, I had met him. That was after. I believe that's after I played with him at the Continental Divide. But I'm not sure if he remembered me from that time. He might have. I don't know. But yeah, I knew him a little bit. I didn't know him that well. He had heard about me, and of course I knew his work. And
did you get anything back from him and after that, or?
I remember wanting to talk to him, but there were so many people that wanted to hang out with him.
Yeah.
So there was so many. There was so many people, and then we had to focus on the gig. And Don, was I don't know if he came with people.
Well, I don't know if we said this on the air. That was his home at the time.
Yeah, he was living out there. But I didn't really get to talk to him much. I talked to him a little. And I know those guys talked. I remember being in a dressing room with Elias and Don and talking about stuff. But Don was the type of guy you couldn't really pin him down for more than a couple of minutes. I mean, he was here and then he was gone. Always over there. It's like I remember clearly his energy that night. It was like, okay, I'm here, and then I'm there, and then I'm there. That was
I got to figure he must have been so happy having those guys in town. And getting to come out and just be part of that. But it was a great hang. It was a great hang. I mean, it was really a great hang. Seeing Farrell there and seeing Lester there. I mean, I'm playing after hours of jam session with Lester, and it was great. It was really a great hang. I remember wanting to stay after the festival. I was going to hang a little longer, but I couldn't change my ticket, so I had to go back. But there were a lot of people in town for that festival, and people were hanging after the festival, and it was great. Let's hear some more music
every night.
Should we pick another one?
Can we play? Can we hear the Pettiford Bridge?
Is that on?
I'm sorry. That's on this one.
That's okay.
This thing.
Lay it on me.
This CD. There were 2 sets. So when they made the CD. They made the CDs. One CD came out first, which was the first set, and they called that Volume 1. Then they pressed the second CD, and that was Volume 2. So what we just heard Lito was the second set. Now what I'm going to play is from the first set. Right?
Okay, yes.
Yeah, that's Volume 1. It says Volume 1 there.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
So tell us again, in case anybody's just tuning in, who's the band and the date?
Okay, this is from the Eddie Moore Festival in Oakland, live at Yoshi's Ed Blackwell Project, and this is Carlos Ward on alto, sax, and flute, Mark Elias on bass, Ed Blackwell who's the leader on drums, and I'm playing cornet. I'm Graham Haynes.
You're listening to WKCR FM New York. Well, that is how you make a Deep Focus episode, or at least the first part of one. And I wouldn't have known that before June 9th, 2008. That was the very first Deep Focus. Graham Haynes, my guest, Ed Blackwell, the topic. And man, I did this one and I was like, okay, I think this is going to work. And I want to, first of all, thank everybody. The last episode I posted, I did something I had no intention of doing, but I did. It was at the request of a number of listeners to give you guys a way to make a contribution financially to the show, which I had never asked for, but I really appreciate the sense of participation that you guys have. So, yeah, anybody who wants to can put something in the pot through PayPal, and you need the email address, and it's deepfocusnow@gmail.com. deepfocusnow@gmail.com. Anything, if you want to do that, anything you do is great. I'm not even going to tell you an amount or anything. There's costs involved, the hosting and all that. I just pay for it out of my pocket because I wanna. I don't get paid to do the show or anything. So yeah, I mean, come on along. Anything you want to throw in there is fantastic. And if you don't want to, or you don't have it today, that's no problem at all. I'm doing this for you. Okay, so anyway, yeah, that's part one. Part two is going to be coming around, or maybe it probably is if it's not early May 2025, then it's already been posted. So you can find part two of this show. Yep, I'm in Midtown Manhattan, and I don't know if you can hear that, there's sirens going by. not unusual. And I told you I would tell you a little bit about the genesis of this show. All right. When I say this show, Deep Focus, you don't have to stay for this, but I know there are people who are interested because you guys tell me. And by the way, that email address I gave is also the email address if you want to send me something. But yeah, so this was 2008, and I started this format of the show, and I had already been at WKCR for well over 20 years at that point. And I started on the show. I had a partner. I just kind of got thrown in with. The two of us got thrown in together. We were both students. I was a transfer student. I didn't know anybody. And Ethan Singer and I were alternating Monday nights. And then, I dug his show. I guess he liked mine. And we said, instead of alternating, let's both do every week, which was really fun. And we did a combination of DJ sets. And the thing we really enjoyed doing was live sets. And we were both out in the clubs in New York all the time. And we were really into the music, and we knew a lot of the musicians. And we would sometimes hear people playing on the street, which was a really lively thing at that time in New York. Still is, kind of. But there were a lot of, people around our age. It was just an exciting moment. And we would invite them into the studio to play on the radio. And it was kind of thrilling. And Ethan was a budding audio engineer, which is what he still does. There's some crazy stuff going on out there. But I'm in here with you. And I was a emerging producer. And it just kind of worked. And it was really fun. And we were like, hey, we have this thing. Let's do it. And the show was a reflection of our day-to-day lives in the music. And it was really fun. And then Ethan and I both became touring professionals, sometimes together, sometimes separately. And we grew up a little bit more, and we weren't hanging out the way we had been. And then Ethan moved out to the West Coast, and which kind of broke my heart a little bit, quite honestly. And I had a kind of crisis of the soul. And well, what am I going to do? I felt like the show was so vital, and I didn't want to just be, it's a student-run station. I didn't want to be the old guy that comes in and, blows the dust off some old LPs. I really felt like I had to do something that was me, that maybe only I could do, or at least something that was a reflection of my experience. And so for the previous 10 years, or maybe not those last 5 years, but I don't know, mid-'80s to mid-'90s into the 2000s, I'd been a tour manager and traveling with musicians, production management, and all that kind of thing. And so there's kind of a set of experiences, a thing that happens on the road. There's a lot of downtime. There's a lot of travel time. There's a lot of dead time. And, you know, we were also into music. We'd fill it with music, and it wasn't all the time. But now this is before the age of MP3s and all of that and streaming media. There might be a cassette player in a van, and you kind of took turns DJing, and, you know, oh, you don't know this Art Blakey recording? Oh, hold on, I got, you know, you don't know this other thing. And we were kind of rubbing shoulders, turning each other onto music. It was an exciting thing. And I felt like at that time, 2008, the record business was really collapsing out from under the musicians, one of their primary sources of income. And so as I'm coming out of this, not coming out yet, this crisis, I don't know, there's only one person really that I talked about it with, and that was Vernon Reed, who you've heard on this show. And I told him, yeah, I'm thinking maybe it's time I just give up the show. And he said, he looks at me, he goes, never give up airtime. And I took that very seriously. And so I came up with this idea that this show could be a way of sharing that fellowship among fellow fans. These guys are musicians, but they were all fans before the music, before they were players, and show you how musicians listen, and kind of be a big 3-hour billboard for encouraging people to get out of the house and be with the music while it's happening. You know, we all started collecting these, you know, digital recordings and live streams. It's not the same. It doesn't count. You got to be there while it's happening. And I felt that so I'm a New Yorker, and there's a lot of New York musicians. There's a lot of musicians from other places too. But I kind of felt like my generation of New York musicians were not getting their due. And I'm thinking these are some really accomplished musicians with a wide range of experiences. And they've had experiences that younger people are never going to have. They're not going to know what it was like to hang out with these people that Graham Haynes is talking about in here, or to hear Count Basie play as I did, or to, countless musicians and all these stories that you hear. So I kind of felt like we needed to shine a light on that. So that was kind of the genesis of Deep Focus. I wanted to give you, the listener, that experience. And this was the live test, this episode that we've been listening to with Graham Haynes. So this was 17 years ago now, and I remember a lot of these stories that Graham told in this episode. This was really a great one. You know, he's been on the show many times with me since then, and it's always a thrill. Great storyteller, fantastic musician. And so, yeah, there's more than you ever wanted to know about how Mitch Goldman started doing Deep Focus, but that's the truth of it. Okay, so this is episode 398 that I've posted. So, I don't know, if this one didn't do it for you, I hope you find one that does, and I'll see you over there at part 2. All right, I'm glad you're along with me for the ride.